The points continue to flow. Just recapping that first half, Sydney's biggest lead 8, Southeast biggest lead 3.
Gosh!
Aerial spectacular in Sydney. McQuatch, Malawatch.
Wow, look at this. Great outbound, great outlet. And Jordan Hunter, Malawatch goes up and throws it on him.
No thought for the landing, just the takeoff and collision. And then the ground shook as two big bodies hit the pine.
Oh my.
Wow. That could well be the dunk of the year.
This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast, and that was McQuatch Malawatch with what I will say was the dunk of NBL 26 to this point. I am Kane Pittman, alongside me, as always, who was at that game, Olgun Ulic. Now, that was not only maybe the dunk of the year, Olgs, but it was also one of 7.5 billion baskets scored last night at Kudos Bank Arena. What did you make of this wild, wild win for the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix?
Well, firstly, I was at the arena, so I was like on the rim side of that dunk. I didn't see the reaction from Tyler Robertson and Quad and Spurge, and they're just like uncontrollable, like they couldn't control.
And Jordy Hunter with just a smile on his face.
I think I was in the sort of back area after the game, and as Jordy was leaving the arena, Tim Suarez sort of walked by him and like patted him on the head, just sort of like a good try. Jordy Hunter's team obviously went to win, but the game was really interesting because obviously you go into a game, and Kane, you've experienced this, where people will ask you, "Oh, what do you think's going to happen? Like, who's going to win?" And for this one, you like invariably these people ask you, and you say, "Oh, you know, the two best defensive teams." You're probably looking at like an 80-78 sort of game, and then all of a sudden you have the highest scoring regulation game in the 40-minute era, which the last thing I would have suspected, but it was just the start was Sydney just running down the Phoenix's throat. The Sydney Kings couldn't defend the Phoenix at all in the half court, and then it was just insane shot making from both sides. It was Kendric Davis, it was Nathan Sobey. I spoke to some of the Kings players after, and they were like, "What the hell is Sobey on right now? Like, what is up with this guy?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "He's playing really freaking well." I'm like, He's an MVP candidate for a reason. He's consistently doing it. So insane shot making. Jordy Hunter's shot making. Delhi went 7 of 8. It was an insane game. It was the antithesis of what I thought we were going to get. Would I say it was a super high quality game? Yeah, I don't know. High quality shot making, sure.
That's the interesting part, because I watched the game a few hours ago, and I was in my head, I'm like, am I really enjoying this? Yes, the shot making, to your point, was absolutely supreme, but I don't think it was the highest quality game of basketball. It felt like just two teams running up and down the court and scoring layups, and every third possession and one opportunity because of some defense that was out of position. So it was fascinating, but I do wonder if the Kings thought that that was the style of basketball they had to play to beat the Southeast Melbourne defense, and then both teams just went into chaos. But 34 lead changes. The biggest lead was only 12 points to Southeast Melbourne. So these two teams were close right throughout the night. You get the 26, 7, and 5 from Sobey, 34 and 6 from Davis. So the Stars definitely filled the box score. It was also just a massive win in the standings. If we think about the Phoenix now 15 and 7 and second position on the ladder, and Sydney 13 and 9 and 4th. So this was a real swing game. They both could have been 14 and 8. Now Southeast Melbourne has that little edge there. But let me ask you this question. Do you think both coaches were happy with the style of basketball? You were in the press conference. What was your feel coming away from that?
I think they were. So Josh King said he wanted a track meet, and that's what they got. I don't know if he loved the sort of D-trans in the first half. Yeah. It was like this. The Phoenix applied so much pressure, and the Kings just did a really good job of leveraging that into just downhill drives toward the rim. They got open layup after open layup. So I don't know if Josh King liked that part of it, but he liked the track meet part of it. And then that whole first half is, I assume, what Gorge wanted. He wanted, all right, they're going to play up the floor and pressure us. We have to leverage it. So I think both coaches wanted this style. I don't think that they expected the sort of lack of resistance that we saw in the half court from both teams. But by the same token, it was impressive shot making from both teams. If you go back and watch every Nathan Sobey shot and every Kendric Davis shot, these weren't all uncontested. Yeah, there was a stretch in the third quarter, especially where the Sydney Kings broke down defensively. They lose Xavier Cooks early in the game to an ankle injury, so all of their rotations were a little bit meddled up. They Gorge didn't like Tim Suarez on the floor in the third quarter. They gave up a ton of wide open threes, especially to DJ Mitchell on the pop. So he went to like a small ball lineup that I don't think he's ever played before. And as in the small ball lineup usually has Xavier Cooks at the 5. This one had Quatnoy or Tyler Robertson at the 5. And that sort of threw into a bit of into chaos, that defense. But again, I'd say the shot making was impressive. As much as the lack of resistance was not impressive, the shot making itself, there are a lot of tough shots. Every Kendric Davis shot outside of his layups were contested. So there was high quality shot making on both sides.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Nathan Sobey. So we're going to have a conversation a little bit later on this show around the MVP race. Is it actually over? I've got some numbers for you. I think it's interesting. You're a voter, so I want to just dive into your mind a little bit and see what you're thinking about and the way you approach your vote year in, year out. So we'll get to that a little bit later. We're going to convo about Jock Landale as well and him having a career year with the Memphis Grizzlies, which is fascinating. And Olgun, my question for you, were you more impressed with Tasmania or more disappointed in Melbourne United? So we'll get to that. Let's start with some news, though, on this podcast. So you mentioned Xavier Cooks. He misses essentially 3/4 of that game last night. That's a significant blow. You can sit there and say the result might have changed. If you're a Southeast Melbourne fan, you don't give a stuff. You got the dub. You're in second position right now. You also got an update on Bull Qual post-game from Brian Goorjian in the press conference. This, was looming as a major story. What did he say on what can you tell us?
So we asked about Xavier Cooks. Gorge said it's probably fine. We asked about Bull Qual, and he said it looks like a difficult situation. He said we're not sure, but it's going to be a bit. Digging around Kudos Bank Arena after the game, the feel was that this was an ACL injury, and as I continued to ask more questions, it was confirmed to me that this looks like a serious ACL injury for Bull Qual. Now he's gotten some scans; they still have to confirm that, but there's a level of confidence in that organization that this is a serious ACL injury. Assuming that's the case, Bull Qual would miss a significant chunk of time. And then that invariably then takes us to the question of, do they bring in a replacement of any sort? There have been calls throughout the season for them to bring in perhaps some sort of insurance at the big spot. Is this an opportunity for them to elevate the minutes of Jalen Galloway, McQuatch Malawatch, Tyler Robertson, and then fill in another area where they have a need? And so their sort of magic date is January 25. They have a game against the Adelaide 36ers. If they do decide to bring someone in, and they haven't discussed this yet, they'll discuss it over the next few days. But if they do decide to bring someone in, this player has to be there, be in Sydney, or at least in Australia, and suited up for that January 25 game.
Bull Qual has been really fun to watch. I like the fact that he's a little bit of an agitator, obviously a highly physical defender, but an easy guy really to support and enjoy. Him trying to figure it out, because he came to Sydney. Everyone was expecting him to be one thing. I don't think he's necessarily been that guy, but this year, probably one of his more consistent seasons. And that is no question a blow for the Sydney Kings. So we will watch what they do, a team that believes they're in the mix. Let me ask you about Perth and David Duke Jr., though. And you can come back to Sydney if you want, but these two situations are kind of similar. We discussed it last week about potentially some optimism around this injury for David Duke Jr. That absolutely does not seem like it's the case. What's going on there?
Yeah, so the David Duke Jr. injury was always going to be weeks. And according to Lockie Reed over at Channel 10 Perth, 8 to 12 weeks is what David Duke Jr. told him.
Season.
Now, it's the season. And so the Wildcats, they are looking at their options. For those asking, they started reaching out to some prospective replacements for David Duke Jr. last week. So they had an idea of the severity. For those asking, they have reached out about Taron Armstrong. I do not believe that's going to happen. I believe they got a swift no on Taron Armstrong. So I think that sort of pipe dream can go out the window. But again, they also have their magic date of January 25. That is a game against Melbourne United. This team has to bring in a replacement. I don't think the ceiling of this team is at the level to compete for a championship or even compete meaningfully in the playoffs if Jaron really, a DP, is their starting point guard. With respect to him, because he's been really good this season. And he's a really good NBL player. But in order for this team to reach a championship ceiling, they need to bring in an import point guard. And that's also the most important part of this. There has to be a point guard, not what Duke Jr. was. And Duke Jr. was a good player in his own right, but I don't think he was the sort of the position. I don't think he filled the need of this team. And so this team is looking for a point guard. January 25 versus Melbourne. This player has to be in town by that game and suited up in order to be eligible. They have to meet the 7-game criteria to be eligible for the postseason.
Maybe third time's the charm. Olks, we've discussed this. Not only do they need to do it if they want to win a title this year, which I feel like is going to be a step too far, depending on who they get. Maybe they do bring in a game changer, but I also think they kind of have their hands tied. They have to do this for the fan base, right? I mean, when you don't bring back Bryce Cotton, you bring in Mason Jones, it doesn't work out. That's probably your fault. David Duke Jr., that one's a little bit different. This isn't your fault. You probably liked what he could develop into, but now he's gone. But the third import point guard, do you know anything around the numbers about this? Because to me, for all the talk about how much money Bryce Cotton could make, this to me seems like it has been a costly season at the guard spot for the Perth Wildcats.
Well, so Mason Jones came in, and I was told that they had to pay out, if not all, the majority of his contract, and it was a substantial contract. David Duke Jr. comes in, and he's not on a crazy contract from what I understand, but they do have to, they'll have to pay. And so if they bring in another player, assuming this player is at a reasonable level, assuming you're not getting someone for the sort of prorated minimum, if you do that, you're not going to compete for a championship. If you do bring in a player who can meaningfully impact winning, you're going to be paying more than what Bryce Cotton is making in Adelaide right now, which I appreciate that is not optimal for the Perth Wildcats. And you're paying that as an import salary versus the Adelaide 36ers who are since the start of the season, have been able to marquee Bryce Cotton's contract. So the numbers are it's not an ideal situation. In hindsight, obviously you're looking at this, but it's not an ideal situation for the Perth Wildcats financially relative to what they could have had they been able to keep Bryce Cotton.
All right, interesting stuff. Perth Wildcats fans, we know you are among the most passionate in the NBL, so let us know what you want this team to do. Are there any dream names that you have out there? Drop them in the comments. We'll get involved, as Olgun said, around 19 days, Olg. So still a little bit of time here, but those days will move very, very quickly. Obviously, Hoops Fest in the middle there as well. So the Kings and the Wildcats, two teams, 4th and 5th right now in the standings, trying to make some moves. I saw something. Did you have any other news before we move on? Actually, let me ask you that.
Nothing that I can say publicly right now.
Okay, I gotcha. We'll talk about the Brisbane Bullets coaching situation in a little bit as well. Yeah. Let's talk about the MVP race. So this I just thought was an interesting conversation. I saw the NBL Instagram, Derek Rucker, a former MVP in the league, mind you. So he is a man that is highly qualified to talk about the MVP race. And he suggested that it was over in his mind. Bryce Cotton has got it locked up. I thought that was an interesting way to look at this. Bryce has been outstanding. You could make the case that he's playing the best basketball of his career. And before I play devil's advocate, just to put the record straight, if I had a vote, which I don't right now, I would also vote for Bryce Cotton. So that's the first disclaimer I want to make. I think you are going to be a voter, though, Olgun. So do you believe the MVP race is over between Bryce Cotton, Kendric Davis, maybe even the guy you saw play live last night, Nathan Sobey?
So for context, I vote. I'm assuming I'm still a voter. Hopefully they haven't kicked me off.
Part of the finalist process. Yes.
We vote for the finalists, who the captains, coaches, assistant coaches then vote on. Do I think it's over? Functionally, yeah. Technically, is there a way for Kendric Davis or Nathan Sobey to put up absurd numbers and finish the season 10-0 and 11-0 and overtake Bryce Cotton? Sure. Do I think that's going to happen? No. That's just statistically, mathematically, just not a probability in any way. But functionally, I think the MVP race is over. I think the Adelaide 36ers have been too good, and I think Bryce Cotton has been too impressive, relative not just to what he's been in the past, but also relative to the rest of the league, for anyone else to sort of seriously, meaningfully be considered to overtake him. He's leading the league in points, assists, steals. Again, do I think his defense is amazing? No, but he's leading the league in steals. Shooting splits are good, and his team is 19-4 right now. There's too many things there that go his way to sort of impeach him in any other way.
I think that's fair. And I do think probably the players and coaches, it's interesting. Do you like the fact that the players and coaches, because the question I will ask you is, I think that the level of research, now they're more qualified as guys that are in there, they're playing against him. So I'm not questioning that. How much time do you think the players and coaches put into the end of season awards? I don't know if you've spoken to any or asked the question.
So they're not deep diving into advanced data in the way that a lot of people are. Like they're not. Everything is primarily it's surface level stuff, which is fine as well. And you know, you don't want to criticize. Like these are the people who play basketball, and we cover them, so they have obviously a really good grasp of the league. My theory is that my theory is that because their votes are not public, you know, what happens if they were public and every Sydney Kings vote is voting for, you know, Admiral Schofield for MVP, so they take 3 votes away from Bryce Cotton. Right, so Kendric Davis has a better chance. Like that's my fear. These people, they have a bias, obviously.
It's an interesting process because we know in the NBA, it is the media that votes for the MVP and all NBA and all those types of things. And my theory, we discussed this a little bit on Nothing But Net the other day, just in regards to the 65 game rule and all those types of things in the NBA. And my theory is when there is stuff attached to this outside of just the award in terms of incentives for contracts, someone like me should not have anything to do with the amount of money an athlete on the court can make. So I think it's like complicated both ways. I don't know what's better if you have.
If not you, then who? Right?
I don't know. Yeah, when it comes to this, I don't know. Is it better to have media do it? Is it better to have players doing it? I don't think, to be honest, you can complain with any of the winners over the last few years. So I think that would be a point to make out. Let me just throw some numbers at you to you know, maybe bring to your attention an argument you could make for Kendric Davis. Again, I would vote for Bryce Cotton. So Adelaide fans right now, they are, oh man, they are red hot, Olgun. This is a fan base that is desperate to win. They haven't won for a long time. And even the slightest suggestion that they aren't the world basketball dominant franchise in the history of the globe right now, they get very, very upset, which I appreciate. They are very passionate and I love it. But here's some numbers. So on the total season, if you look at it, 25 points and 8 assists for Cotton, 23 points and 5 assists for Kendric Davis. So the numbers are actually pretty close. And I would point out that Bryce Cotton is playing around 6 minutes more per game. That matters. But on a minute-by-minute basis, Kendric Davis is scoring at a higher rate than Bryce Cotton, which is just throwing it out there. That's interesting. The other thing that I found today when I was looking through was the highest scoring games, the 3 highest scoring games for each player so far this season. So for Bryce Cotton, 53 points v Cairns on October 18, 41 points v Cairns on November 16, and 39 points v Brisbane on September 28. So hey, you can only put up points against who you're playing. I'm not discrediting those games, but that is the 2 worst teams in the league by a long way. Kendric Davis, 3 high scoring games, 38 points v Perth on December 12, 34 v Melbourne on November 3, and 31 v Southeast Melbourne. He also had 30 last year. So lower totals, better opposition. Does that matter to you? I'm not 100% sure. And then the other thing that I think does matter is the matchups against each other. And I know that they're not guarding each other 1v1, but when I think about the NBA, you bet I am putting more emphasis if Jokic didn't get hurt, when Denver plays OKC and Nikola Jokic is on the floor and SGA's on the floor, because you are the best player on the floor, you're the MVP, you're going to carry your team to a win. Sydney has a 2-1 advantage right now. Cotton is averaging 16 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, has not been efficient. Davis, 25 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. He has been the better player in those individual matchups. Does any of that make you believe that maybe it's actually closer than what we could be led to believe?
No. Not at all, unfortunately. I appreciate that the games against the better teams are meaningful. I don't know how meaningful they are as far as individual performances, right? If you play against the Illawarra Hawks, if you're playing the Illawarra Hawks who are coming 7th on the ladder, and these guys don't have great individual performances, well, hey, you have Wani Swakala-Bullock draped all over you. If you're playing the Brisbane Bullets, you can say the same about Mitch Norton or Sam McDaniel if he was healthy. Like these, I don't know if those are as meaningful. I value consistency over the course of the season, and generally a guy's average will be an indication of consistency over the course of a season. I value efficiency as well, and if you look at the efficiency numbers, Bryce Cotton's numbers, I think substantially outweigh Kendric Davis's numbers. Last
Similar
night
from the field, 3-point, a lot better for
from
Bryce.
the field. Kendric was 11 of 13 from the field last night, including 4 of 4 from 3. So last night he was super efficient. But overall in the season, he hasn't been a very good 3-point shooter. Again, you can sort of nitpick those things. But I think the level at which Bryce Cotton is scoring while also showing this development in his distribution game, in his creation for others, I think that's a very impressive thing. But for me, what is value? Value is your sort of how much you contribute to winning. And the LA 36ers are 19-4. I think we sort of gloss over that a little bit because they're 36ers. They're supposed to be good. But 19-4 is a very impressive record. We were talking about Melbourne United at the start of the season as this sort of unbeatable, unimpeachable team. The Sydney Kings were supposed to be this sort of almighty team with the way they're built and how deep they are. But the LA 36ers are 19-4. They're winning games they're supposed to win. One of the games you mentioned, the Adelaide-Sydney game, the one that was in Canberra, I was at that game. That was an overtime game that could have gone either way. And so the individual matchup and like the outcome of those matchups doesn't mean as much to me as much as sort of consistency over the course of the season. And I think Bryce Cotton has demonstrated that more than he has to at this point. And again, the winning matters the most to me, and that 36ers have been doing that.
Well said. Yeah, I would vote Bryce, but I think it is a lot closer than a lot of people give it credit for. I think there is significant historical stuff. Now, Bryce might be playing the best season of his career. I'm not taking away from that, but I think there's a lot of historical stuff. It's Bryce, man. Of course he's going to win the MVP again. This is what he's supposed to do. And I think Kendric Davis, I think there's some bad publicity out there for him, and I think that's unfair over the course. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves when he plays really, really well. I think he's having an outstanding season.
So I think Kendric absolutely is getting the credit he deserves. We did a marketplace a couple of weeks ago where we all mentioned that, yeah, his counting stats are down from last season, but we think he's playing better basketball than he did last season. Again, it's just unfortunate that the person who is probably going to win the MVP over him is just playing at sort of this alien level. So it's just unfortunate that this historic season from Kendric is just not going to be noticed because of Bryce. I think there's a better argument that Nathan Sobey should be in the sort of the mix for the number 2 MVP spot because of the season he's having, the way he's been able to impact winning, the efficiency he is playing with, the consistency night in and night out. Like, I think there is an argument that Nathan Sobey is sort of the guy who's most knocking at the door to Bryce Cotton for MVP than anyone else in the league. And again, I think he's someone who falls victim to scrutiny that he's sort of had over the course of the last few seasons. While we are appreciating what he's doing, I don't know if we're appreciating the level in which he's doing it and the consistency in which he's doing it. And that's my last point. There is a difference, and I think we're seeing it right now with Melbourne United and some of these guys we just mentioned. There is a difference between imports. There are levels to this where, Tyson Walker has been great in spurts. Milton Doyle has been great in spurts, and Jesse Edwards too. But there is a difference between that level of import and, your Bryce Cotton and your Kendric Davis and your Nathan Sobey. And 2 of those guys are locals. Obviously, Bryce Cotton's a local now. But those guys doing what they do consistently, night in and night out, that's the difference between those MVP caliber dudes and just your pretty good imports. That's why I think what those guys are doing, all 3 of them, are really impressive.
Yeah. Last point. We've been going for a while. Producer for Tessa tells us this convo has been going on for a while. She's not saying it's a bad convo. So, not the credit to Tessa. Last point I'll make. I clearly do value the marquee matchups more, games against better teams more. And I also value the moments. And there was a moment in the game the other day where Adelaide beat Sydney, where Adelaide's leading by 1 point. Bryce Cotton goes baseline. Daly's all over him. He makes the shot. They lead by 2. The ball goes down the other end of the floor. Cotton switches on to Kendric Davis. Davis fakes him out so bad that Bryce Cotton doesn't even bother trying to defend the second shot because he's got no chance. And this would have tied the game in the last minute. That is an MVP moment. He didn't make the shot. It was short. DJ hits the big 3. Adelaide wins the game. So that is the point I would make. You can come and make your arguments everywhere. I think Bryce is going to win the MVP. But I do think you can dive in and you can make an argument to say that with 10 games to go for each player, essentially, it's not 100% over. So anyway, a fun convo. I think. I suspect most people will be in the camp of Bryce Cotton, but there's the health stuff as well. Adelaide hasn't had a single injury. Sydney's been, battling some stuff through the season. So you can make whatever argument you want, Ogs. I
agree it's not over. For me, it's just, again, if you look at the rest of the season, I think that Adelaide 36 is going to win more games than they lose. And with the injuries that the Sydney Kings are going through right now, there's a chance that they drop some games. And I think Adelaide's record will be too good to not consider Bryce as the obvious MVP.
All right. I like it. Anyway, let us know what you think. Is it absolutely done and dusted? Adelaide 36ers fans, I know what you think, okay? All right? I understand. There's nothing that could possibly happen that could change this. We were going to talk about Brisbane Bullets next. Once again, apologies to Vitessa, but I'm running my own show here today. We need to get to the NBA because we've been going for quite a while. That convo went for a long time. So let's get to StatMate Streak Watch. Download StatMate for all your NBA hot stats completely free. And one guy that we wanted to speak about was Jock Landale Olgun, and really just tip our hat to the season he is having out with the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, things haven't been perfect in Memphis in terms of the rest of the injury report, but Jock has been able to capitalize on that. 60.4% true shooting. No question, having the best NBA season he's had so far in his career.
And touch wood, the injury sort of curse on that team does not extend to Jock Landale, because he has been the one who has been he's been rewarded for the injuries to others, right? They're generally people in his position. But career season almost feels like it's underselling it. He's averaging 11 and 6 right now. He's effectively doubling all of his best career highs from other seasons. Yeah. This is a really impressive season. This is the reason he went to Memphis, because he was going to get the usage. But the efficiency in which he's shooting it, 40% from 3 on a ton of attempts, this is very real. And then you wonder, is he going to finish his season in Memphis? Are there teams around the league who are contending for championships who could use a functional backup big, who don't currently have functional backup bigs? You don't want to just list every team who could use him, because theoretically he can go and help a bunch of teams. But I look at are the Nuggets, are they loving life with Jonas Valanciunas as their backup big? Would they prefer someone like Jock Landale? Hey, potentially. If you're the Lakers, is DeAndre Ayton someone who you're going to rely on every single game? Could we get a repeat of that Suns team that had Ayton and Landale? Potentially. So invariably, this is the thing that happens. He plays really well on a team that's sort of middling, and he becomes trade bait because of his contract, because it's a super team-friendly contract. I wonder if there is a contending team out there that takes a leap on him, because he is shown to be an unbelievably functional basketball player in the NBA, excuse me.
Both, in fact.
It's true.
The championship glory days in Melbourne United, Wasn't too far away. Olgs. He's shooting 52% from the floor and 40% from 3. Those numbers are very similar to last year. The difference is the volume, which is exactly what you pointed to. So last year, he only attempted 152 shots. This year, he's already at 271, and we're not even halfway through the NBA season. So, as you said, touch wood everywhere that this continues. But let's not forget, to your point, trade deadline, by my watch, 1 month away today. Can you believe that? This is where the NBA season really starts to ramp up, on the road to the trade deadline, then post-trade deadline, the race, obviously, to the playoffs there. So whether or not he moves, to be honest, he might not be able to be moved, because this Memphis team kind of really needs him at the moment, with the depth of the big men not being there. But your point is exactly right. He's on a minimum deal, and this is a guy that is playing for his NBA future. He just turned 30 years old. So this might be one of the last, I hope not, but one of the last opportunities to maybe try and get a multi-year deal somewhere with a little bit more cash. So this is a big-time few months for Jock, but just happy for him, man. This guy gets shifted all over the country here in the US, and I would love to see him just get settled for a couple of years. He deserves it, man. He's proven it.
And this deal with the Grizzlies was a sort of bet on myself sort of deal.
Yeah,
there was more money elsewhere, but the opportunity was there. He took it, and he's running with it, and that's super impressive. Again, the stats don't lie. He's unbelievably productive and efficient.
Agreed. Now, download StatMate to play more or less. Just make 5 player predictions daily for your chance to win $1,000. So go check that out, and check out the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm supposed to be going there this weekend, Olgs. I don't know. I think the trip might be off, but I was going to spend 3 or 4 days with him. So I'm hoping we can knock that out at some point, because you know this from our perspective as well. There's not too many Aussie basketball players that are more interesting to speak to than Jock Landale. Let's just say this man does not hold back what is on his mind, which we absolutely appreciate. He's a good man. So we'll continue.
What's wrong with you? You don't like Memphis?
Yeah, I would love to go. Sometimes these decisions are out of my hands. I'm not sure what's going on with the higher ups, but I've never been to Memphis either. Yeah, mixed reviews, but I would like to check it out at some point in time. They're playing the Thunder, then they're playing the Brooklyn Nets as well. A couple of interesting games there. I think we'll skip Brisbane, the coaching chat. I don't think that's a conversation that's going away. Let's wrap this up with Melbourne and Tasmania. Tasmania win the game 84-75. By the way, I said to you last week, Tasmania will regret some of these losses to the bottom teams. This was the most Tasmania week of all time. You lose to Illawarra, then you beat Melbourne United. Now, you could make a very strong argument that the wins over Melbourne United are no longer marquee wins or big wins. Were you more impressed with Tasmania or disappointed in Melbourne? This skid that they're on, it's starting to get remarkable. Like, hard to believe what we're watching.
Yeah, the skid they're on, I still contend that it's because of their 3 imports. They have such a reliance on those 3, and if those 3 aren't playing at the level, then it's very difficult to maximize everybody else. And so I look at, Tyson Walker was good in this game, but I don't think there's a consistency to the way he plays. I don't think he plays at a high level consistently. Same with Milton Doyle. Same with Jesse Edwards, who I think is in a bit of a lull. So I think if those 3 aren't rolling, then it's very difficult for this team. But I think this was impressive from Tasmania. Mainly Will Magnay and what he did, because this was the best game Will Magnay has played on both ends, but especially defensively. In the third quarter especially, he was just a monster. Like, there's no other way to put it. The United didn't want to look at the rim. They didn't want to look inside the paint because Will Magnay was there. He was coming out of nowhere to block shots. The shot deterrence was incredible, but like I thought this was sort of one of those we get these like 3 times a year where you get like a Superman game from Will Magnay. Just his rim protection is outrageous, and if he's playing like that, with what you're not always going to get 27 points from him, right? You're not always going to get 36 minutes from him, but if he's playing with some level of efficiency offensively, but mainly with that sort of in position defensively, and then everyone else can chip in offensively. You get Bryce Hamilton closing out the game. You get Tiger Campbell sort of keeping the offense trickling along with Jock Deng chips in. Then this Tassie team is one to be reckoned with. They're a team that you don't want to play in the play-in. And if you have to play them in the playoffs, it feels like they're built for that. It feels like they defensively, if they have the anchor there in Will Magnay, then they're sort of, I don't want to say as good as any of those other teams, but they can match up with them. And I wouldn't be straight up picking that other team to win.
Good to have you on board, mate. But no, yeah, I do think it is interesting. To your point, though, about can you compete? Yes. But I think Tasmania would thrive in a 3-game series. And by virtue of going 3-6 against the bottom 4 this year, they put themselves in this single elimination zone. That's, ultimately probably going to cost them. I mean, they would have to go on a hell of a run here. If you swap that around, instead of being 3-6 against the bottom 4, you're 6-3, then all of a sudden you're in the mix for 3rd or 4th position, and probably not out of calculations for the top 2 as well. So Tassie, I do think, is better than their record. I've been saying that for a while. But yeah, when you get that version of Will Magnay, it does change things. To your point, 27 points, 13 rebounds, 3 blocks, and about 15 shot deterrence. I mean, they were terrible. And it's an indictment on Jesse Edwards because, man, he just got bullied all night long. It was far too easy. Your point about the imports is interesting. This is the last one I've got on Melbourne, because I am sure. I know I haven't been as high on them as some, but to lose 6 out of 8 games, I didn't see this coming. They haven't been on a run like this since the Rajon Tucker, Rattan Mays team.
Xavier Rattan Mays.
Yeah, that mean you were covering games and asking Dean about XRM every game and just fearful for what the answer might be.
Jordan Caroline. Man,
yeah, and that team was just not good. So this team does feel better than that. I do think the imports matter. The other thing that does stand out to me with this Melbourne team, you think about the run they've been on in the last 3 or 4 years, they've always had the best or equal to the best local players in the league. You think about Joe Luala-Chul and Jack White and Jock Landale, Matthew Dellavedova, Shea Illy, who is basically not a player on the roster this year because he's hardly played. And they've had all NBL level Chris Golding. Golding's been all NBL 5 straight seasons. That's not going to be the case this year. So yes, it's the imports, but they've probably never had more reliance on the imports than they do this year. And they just don't have the local star, marquee talent. Obviously CG is a star, but he hasn't had a year like that this year. I think he could bounce back next season. I'm not writing him off, but this is a very, very different look. And it does make you wonder what it looks like moving into the future for Melbourne United based on what they've built in the past.
Well, I think this is by design, though. Tyson Walker comes in to replace Delhi. Jesse Edwards comes in to replace JLA or whoever that sort of.
So do you think it was a mistake? You're around this team a lot. Do you think it was a mistake to go down the import path and go away from what has worked?
No, not necessarily. Because again, you can't do this, but if you invert their season, if they started off, 2-8, and then they win 9 straight, we're going to be talking about them in a different way. Obviously, form matters, but I think a lot of teams around the league have scouted these imports. Obviously, we know who Milton Doyle is, but I think they've scouted Tyson Walker and Jesse Edwards. they know how to put them in spots where they're not as comfortable. And I think they're also, it's important to note that they're quite young. These guys are 25, 26. I think I would bet on them refining their form. And if they refine their form, then I think Chris Goulding, again, I don't think it's going to be a bounce back next season. I think Chris Goulding bounces back in the next few weeks. He went through an illness. That compounded with the imports not playing at the level, I don't think you're able to maximize a shooter like Chris Goulding. So again, if those imports just sort of refine their form, then I think Chris Goulding can refine his form. Add Shea Ili to the mix. Finn Delaney hasn't played the last couple of games. So the pieces are there. And I think the defensive sort of foundation is there. It's just a lot of guys in and out of the lineup. The imports not playing at the level, not shooting at the level. I think that's impacted everything. And then it gets to a point where, we're Melbourne United. We're supposed to be really, really, really good. And we're losing these games. You get down early in the game and all of a sudden things get tight. That Brisbane game, they won the game, but they felt tight. And I think this team just has to loosen up. And I think those imports just stepping it up, performing at the level that I think we know that they can play at, then I think that changes everything. But I feel like we've been saying this for a couple of weeks and they haven't done it. And so again, all eyes are on the imports at this point. I don't blame them for going the import route. I think on aggregate, the talent is largely the same as the last couple of seasons. It's just whether these young imports can perform on a consistent basis. We have to wait and see.
Yeah, the fact that they started 13-2 has put them in the position where they can still finish top 2, so they can absolutely still get hot at the right time of the season. And just with the Chris Goulding point, it was more about next year, can he have a bounce back like full season, and get back to that all NBL level. Sure. I agree with you. He's still a terrifying prospect in a one-off game. We're just waiting for it to happen. He was 2 for 8 from 3 in that game against Tassie. All right, we had more on the agenda, but we'll wrap it here. But good convos, Ogs. Strong stuff.
We could have got to the other stuff. You spent 10 minutes telling me why Kendric Davis is the MVP. I don't know what are you doing, bro?
I'm a thought provoker. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to
get
a
rage baiter. That's what you are.
I don't have to get positive reviews, Olgan. I just present information, and then the people at home can decide whether they think I'm an idiot or not. And that's just the way we roll on the ESPN.
There's an argument, there's a legit argument. I just don't think it's 10 minutes long. There's a legit argument.
You noticed that I did say at the start I would vote for Bryce. That was me, really trying to leave myself of any real vitriol online. But anyway. That was good stuff. Let us know what you thought. And if you're angry about that MVP conversation, let us know. We're cool with that. If you want to be angry at Olgan for saying that it's over, that's totally fine. This was the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. I'm Kane. Olgan Ulich is a star. You know who he is. Fatessa, our producer, is a star as well. We'll be back next week. See you next week, Olgs.
See ya.